It's not true.
All right.
Recording in progress. Got it.
All right. So what's on your mind these days, Shane?
What's on my mind these days is the huge numbers of evangelical Christians that don't understand what's happening in this country today or what could happen if they keep on following the people who are evangelical Christians. I think people do not realize that this didn't start with Ronald Reagan. This started when Mr. Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, allowed a group of congressmen who had been lobbied by the Knights of Columbus to get the words under God put it into the pledge. The words under God do not belong in the pledge. And right after that, he started having prayer breakfasts in the Capitol. Both of those things should be out of the government. We have had separation of church and state in this country for a whole lot of years. And then suddenly, because of Frank Schaeffer's bringing evangelical Christianity to this country, and Frank Schaeffer will tell you that that's exactly what is happening. And if you have ever read any of his books, you know that we are in a dangerous situation right now. These folks want to take us back to the 1800s. I don't want to go back to there. I don't want to go back to men in knee pants and powder wigs and women in corsets that will keep their waists no bigger than 18 inches around. I don't want to go back to that. But there are a whole lot of evangelical Christians in this country who want that. People need to be aware of what it is they're doing to us. These last three members that were put on the Supreme Court are all about what Frank Schaeffer warned us about in his books. You've got to read his books before you'll understand what's going on here.
Well, what did he warn us about?
He warned us about having this country become a theocracy, having this country run by a religion, having this country think that only Christians belong in this country, having this country people in this country convinced that of the rightness of whiteness and the rightness of believing in, but not practicing what's in the Bible. This is very, very dangerous. What is happening to Muslims and to anybody else who says, wait, I don't have to be a Christian. Oh, yes, you do. Oh, yes, you do. These are scary times for me. I've seen it all before. I am seeing happen now what my father watched happen, and I was born in 1933. So from 1933 until 1945, I heard my father just exploding about the kinds of things that were happening then because of Hitler. And now for 4 years, we had a man whose favorite book was The New World Order by Adolf Hitler. It was in his locked drawer in his bed, the chest beside his bed. You have to realize that what we have been through we went through for 4 years was Hitlerian. And what we are doing now is trying to recover it. But the evangelicals got a foothold while Trump was in office. And he didn't know any better. He really doesn't know any better. He really doesn't know much at all. But he does know how to incite people and to cause problems that we needn't have had. But we've got them now, and we've got to deal with them. And it's going to be extremely difficult because everything I say is going to be called the Antichrist. No, I'm not the Antichrist. I am the anti-theocracy.
Anti-fascist.
Well, I don't like the word fascist either, because not every evangelical Christian is a fascist. Mm-hmm. They are suffering from self-imposed ignorance. And as long as you can refuse to learn anything new and only read what was good in the 17 and 1800s, that's how long you can stop this country's progress toward a real democracy. We're losing our democracy, and we're losing it very rapidly.
Yeah.
Now, are you sorry you asked?
No. You had anything to add?
Oh, well, we need to go back to separation of church and state. Mm-hmm. We need to take the words under God out of the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, because we are forcing children. When I was teaching third grade, I told my third graders, you don't have to say the words under God in the pledge if you don't want to. Because I happen to have students whose parents didn't believe in praying publicly. Their religion was personal, their religion was private, and they thought it should stay that way. Those kids had the right to not practice what their parents were opposed to. They had the right to agree not to say the words under God in the pledge. We should all have had that right. And we had it before Dwight Eisenhower. I was disappointed. That's one thing that bothered me about Dwight Eisenhower was his bowing to the evangelicals at that time.
Mm. So racism is such a part of this country.
No, 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 no. Racism needn't be a part of this country. Nobody is born a racist. There is no gene for racism.
Mhm.
Racism is a learned response. Anything you learn, you can unlearn. White people, God, I believe that God created the human race. I believe that the human race created racism. Anything you create, you can destroy. We could destroy racism in 2 generations if we decided to. And let me tell you something, we are going to make that decision very shortly because within 30 years, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. That's a fact. And you can build all the walls on the border, on the southern border of the United States that you can afford to. That will not avoid the fact that within 30 years, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. Do you realize that only 15 to 18% of the population of the earth is classified as white? And
Yeah.
do you realize that white is not a skin color? People do not come in white and black. We come in shades of brown.
Yeah.
Let's get over it. Those 2 words, white and black, came out of the Spanish Inquisition. Torquemada went around killing people in order to convince them that they should be Catholics. It wasn't until he realized that he had killed a whole bunch of Christians that he decided you can't tell what a person's religion is by looking at them. So he had to figure out a way to describe, to define or decide whether a person might or might not be a Christian. So he set upon the 2 colors, white and black. White is the color of goodness and purity. Black is the color of savagery and evil. Now, we have lived with those for about 440 years. Don't you think it's time for us to put a stop to it?
I do. You're preaching
Yeah.
to the choir, James.
I'm preaching to the choir. Now we shall sing hymn number 135, and I will lead, all right?
No.
All right.
My daughter says, no, stop that, Sarah. Okay. Now, you see, this is racist. The United States doesn't have to be a racist country, but
Mm,
racism is extremely profitable.
yeah.
And if you haven't read the book, the
Which one?
well, I'm trying to think.
The
It's
new
really
Jim
great.
Crow?
Rich thanks to racism.
Rich thanks to racism. Rich thanks to racism. You got to get it and read it, and all of a sudden you will realize, oh, that's the reason for all these new schools propping up, all these charter schools. Read the book Rich Thanks to Racism. It will blow you away, and it will make you as angry as I am at what's going on in this country on the basis of religion. Your religion is your business. My religion is my business. I do not have the right to force the state to force everybody to believe as I do.
Need I ask about your opinion on Roe v. Wade being overturned?
Well, I think for 4 years we were governed by the world's only living abortion.
Wow. Yeah.
I
Wow.
mean, this is a totally unthinking individual. This is a
Well,
person who has no idea of what humanity really is or what democracy really is. And so we have had 4 years of that kind of government, and a whole lot of people in this country believed what he was saying because it made them feel good. He was racist, sexist, ageist, you name it. He had that problem. So anybody who had one of those problems followed this man. So that's 40% of the population.
yeah. Okay.
You
Okay.
seen Unfit yet?
What?
Have you seen Unfit yet on Prime Video?
No, I don't need persuading. I mean, it's clear to me he's probably the worst form of human being we've ever had anything to do with.
No,
So,
no, 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 no. He wasn't. He was a man who believed in Hitler. He believed in Hitler. That's it. And he decided that he would do what Hitler did. It seemed he was too young to remember what Hitler really did and what the impact of that was on the world. Hitler's impact on the world was absolutely, we had no idea it would be that bad. He has had as ugly an impact on the world, but it doesn't have to last as long. We could put a stop to his Because we could put a stop to the people we can't put a stop to the people, but we can put a stop to the ideas that he put into people's heads. If you're the right color and white is right, then and if you're a male, you're strong, but you need to remember that smell isn't everything.
Well, what kind of upbringing did you have? You grew up in Iowa, right?
No, I grew older in Iowa.
Okay.
Okay, you don't grow up if you stay where you were born.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, you aren't allowed to grow up. You have to maintain all the things that you were taught as a child, because if you don't, then you aren't one of them. And so I grew older in Iowa. I grew up when I left there and learned about the real world. I was born to a Catholic mother, a casual Catholic mother, and a devoted Baptist father, and both their families disowned them. One because she was married to a Baptist, one because he was married to a Catholic. So we didn't have much communication with our cousins. But my father said, "You don't judge a book by its cover or a man by his skin." And he would say to us every week, "You know the difference between right and wrong. Now do the right thing, God damn it." And I thought, well, it's wrong to say God damn it, but I didn't dare challenge him because he had a lilac bush out at the northwest corner of the house, a nice lilac bush, and lilac switches hurt when you are struck on the legs with lilac switch. And he used the lilac switch to convince us that what he was saying was right. But what my father said was right. You don't judge a person by the way they look. You don't judge a person by how they worship or whether they worship. And he was just the wisest and most moral person I have ever known.
And I expect you got along with him quite well.
I did if I kept my mouth shut, but I was the one in the family that never kept her mouth shut. So I went to school lots of times with stripes on my legs from switching, because there are things that just, he wasn't a cruel person. He simply knew that he had 7 kids, 5 of them within 7 years, of one another, or 9 years of one another. Anyway, we went from 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and then 2 more. So he had a lot to think about, and he was raising us on not very deep dirt farm in northeast Iowa, 160 acres, and no electricity and no running water. And they tried to raise 7 children in that situation, and they did it. And they raised 2 civil engineers, a dairy plant operator, and 3 teachers. Wow. And lost 1 child at the age of 3.5. So they were successful in what they did. And he was successful in what he taught us. He would say to us, "If you're going to lie, don't lie to me." So you didn't lie to him. Kept your mouth shut. When it was going to come out a lie, you better shut up, because he'd look at you and he'd know whether you were telling the truth. And the worst thing you could do, as far as my father was concerned, was lie. There's no reason for lying. If you've done something, own up to it and take what comes as a result of it, but don't lie about it. So lying did not come easily to me. It still doesn't.
So were you exposed to many different types of people in Iowa?
No, the only people that lived in Iowa were poor dirt farmers at that time. And that's what we were exposed to, was farmers who depended on the soil and took care of the animals and raised children so that someday those children could help them in their old age. And that's what we did.
Okay. So when did you first encounter people that weren't like you?
Well, when I walked out the door, nobody was quite like any of us, but you're talking about color, right?
Yeah. Complexion.
Yeah.
When was the first time that you encountered somebody, had a serious conversation or interaction with somebody?
Well, when I was in high school, there was a young man on the football team, on the Manly football team, who was Black, and my brother, who played football, said he was the best athlete and the best sport he had ever seen. He said, "He's fair. That man is the most fair man on the other football team." He really admired him. And then I went to college at the University of Northern Iowa, which at that time was Iowa State Teachers College. And all of a sudden, here were all these people of color who knew more than I did, who dressed better than I did, who had more money than I did, who had been more places than I would ever go. And I realized that I had been grossly lied to, that number one, that we must all be members of the same race, because they believed in the same religion that I did, which is a religion of one race. And here we are together, being taught the same things that I was taught as a child, and those were lies. Columbus didn't discover America, and the Native Americans, what we call Native Americans, didn't spring up out of the soil. We all came from a country in Africa, but nobody ever told us that. We were thoroughly indoctrinated in how to be a good American, not how to be a good United States of America citizen, but how to be a good American, which is in itself ignorance, because America is everything from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America. So we, in our arrogance, call ourselves Americans. No, we are citizens of the United States of America. And the most important word in that title is the word united. And we're going to realize that very shortly, because we had 4 years of a person who decided he would divide us into the divided states of America. And he worked hard at it, and he got away with it a lot. We are the most divided now that we have been since the Civil War. Yeah. And it's because, number one, television. If you can sit your child in front of a television set and let that child be indoctrinated by what's on that television set, you don't have to teach that child to read, and you don't have to have that child see you reading. Children ought to see their parents reading books every night. My father read every night. My father read everything he could get his hands on. And my father would say, if you haven't learned something new during the day, when you go to bed at night, if you can't think of something new that you learned that day, stay up until you get a book or a magazine or the radio and learn something new. Do not go to bed without learning something new every day. And he did that every day. And when we'd come home from college, he'd sit down and listen to us. He listened to my brothers who were going to be civil engineers. When I came home from college, I listened to him, because he had so much to teach me, and he knew so much more than I knew. And he'd ask me what I learned, and I'd tell him, and he'd say, well, I'll be damned. Well, I'll be damned. And he was always interested in what I had to say. But when the boys came home, he was fascinated by what they had to say, because they were going to be civil engineers. Teachers and civil engineers don't do the same things. He said to us, when we were deciding what we were going to do with our lives, make up your mind what you're going to do. Make $1 or make a difference, and decide what you're going to do. So my brothers made dollars. My 2 sisters and I became educators and made a difference.
Now, how do you think you've made a difference as an educator?
Well, I took children who couldn't read above the 1st grade level when they got to my classroom in 3rd grade, and taught them how to read in such a way that by the time they left my classroom, 9 months later, they were reading at or above the 4th grade level. And some of them were reading at the 6th grade level. Their independent reading level was 6th grade. I think I made a difference in every one of those kids, because many of them who were never supposed to amount to anything, one of them became, well, in the film, The Eye of the Storm, all the 16 kids in the film, The Eye of the Storm. Have you ever seen it?
When I was very young.
Well, those 16 kids are all moderately to severely dyslexic. When the principal handed me my class roll at the beginning of the school year, he said, these kids aren't going to learn to read. Nobody else has been able to teach them to read, neither can you. Pass them on and get them out of here. They'll probably never amount to anything anyway. Now, I admired that man so much, I couldn't believe that he would say those words, because he was an absolutely fantastic individual. So I went to the office and looked through the cumulative files, and every one of those kids that was on that class roll had a high math score and low reading and spelling score. So I knew what I was dealing with. I knew that these kids had a reading difference, not a disability, but a reading difference. And I had taken a course in how to teach to that reading difference. Took a 3-week course and found out exactly how to teach the child, like Henry Ford and like Albert Einstein, both of whom were dyslexic. I found out how to teach them, and I looked at that class roll and I thought, oh, you're going to be so sorry you said that to me, because every one of these kids are going to complete high school. And they did, except one who was killed in an alcohol-related accident 2 weeks before graduation. But one of those kids became a lawyer. One became a junior and senior high school principal. All of them, except one, completed high school. There was those kids weren't failures. The people who couldn't teach them to read were the ones who failed. They got paid for failing. Those kids got reprimanded for their teachers' failures. If I could teach them to read, so should their 1st and 2nd grade teachers been able to teach them to read.
Sure.
Absolutely. No necessity at all for those kids to be told you're never going to amount to anything. Because now, especially the one who's a lawyer, could buy and sell most of the teachers in that system.
Now, were these kids of a different ethnicity than you?
No, they were all just
Okay.
nice white kids from Europe and Ireland and England. They were all,
German mostly.
what somebody called us today, what somebody wrote to me in a letter today, I'm Caucasian. My father says I'm Caucasian and you're wrong. So I had to write back and say, ask your father where those Caucasian people came from. They didn't spring up out of that and where they originated. So now that father is going to be really angry and take that iPad away from that kid. And he should, because that kid's learning too much for that father.
Well, yeah, learning
Yeah.
too much for that father. Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. Now, didn't you catch a lot of flack after your experiment, the brown eye, blue eye experiment? Because
Well, yeah, but that's because people think like you do, that it was an experiment. An experiment, you do an experiment to learn something from people. I wasn't trying to learn something from those kids. I was trying to teach them something. It's illegal and unethical to experiment with people without their knowledge and without their permission.
sure.
We talked about what racism is the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. Those little third grade, that was the first group of third graders. And we talked about that. And I asked them if they had any idea how it would feel to be something other than white in this country. No, would you like? No, yeah. I said, would you like to do something today that will help you know that? Yeah. It sounded like fun. Everything we did in my classroom practically was fun. I said, okay, your skin color is a result of the amount of melanin in your skin. The color in your eyes is a result of the amount of melanin in your eyes. If it's all right to judge people by the amount of melanin in their skin, maybe it makes even better sense to judge them by the amount of melanin in your eyes, because your eyes are closer to your brain than your skin is. And they thought that made sense. And I said, so today, would you like to treat people positively or negatively on the basis of the color of their eyes? Yeah. I said, okay, fine. You blue-eyed people, go to the back of the room. Why? Because you aren't as good as brown-eyed people. You don't have enough melanin in your eyes. And it was like instant ugly and instant emotional difference and instant awareness that they hadn't had before and instant going along to get along because they'd been taught to do what the teacher said. And it was like I learned more from their behavior in that first half hour than I ever learned in a psychology class. I watched brilliant little third grade boys and girls who couldn't read the day before they had started the exercise with brown eyes, who could read that day because he had the right color eyes. I watched little blue-eyed kids who were brilliant the day before, who couldn't read because he had the wrong color eyes. And I watched that happen, and I thought it was my imagination. I really thought that first day when I watched brown-eyed boys do things in the classroom that I had never seen them do before, that it was my imagination. And then the same thing happened on Monday when I reversed the exercise, and the blue-eyed kids did things that they hadn't been able to do on Friday. And that's all of a sudden I realized what we have done since the Spanish Inquisition, since the late 1400s, early 1500s. We have been treating people positively or negatively on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they have absolutely no control. And interestingly enough, when I do this exercise with adults, and I did it for several years with people who work for US West Public Service of Colorado and US West Direct. And we had males, pale-faced males, blue-eyed males coming into that workshop wearing brown contact lenses. And the person, the facilitator who hired me, said, that one's a bluey. I said, how do you know? And she says, because I know, I'm watching. I said, why didn't you tell me that? And she told me that during the debriefing. I'd say, why didn't you tell me that when it was going on? She said, because I wanted to watch him squirm. He knew that I know he's not brown-eyed. But on brown glasses, brown contact lenses, so that he wouldn't have to be treated as a bluey. And those are adults over the age of 30, some of them 55 years old and almost ready for retirement. You can do with pale-faced adults in 15 minutes what it takes us years to do with a person of color, because they are so, as somebody has written the book, White Fragility, we aren't fragile, we are ignorant. We are living with self-imposed ignorance, and we are comfortable with it. And the only reason you get uncomfortable is that if you speak the truth, around people who believe in the rightness of whiteness. And when you tell them, look, fool, you aren't white. This shirt I'm wearing is white. This hair I'm wearing is white. This skin isn't white.
Right.
And don't be a fool and call me a white person, because I'm not. I'm melanemic. If you don't have enough iron in your blood to keep you healthy, you're anemic. So if you don't have enough melanin in your skin to protect yourselves from the rays of the sun, you must be melanemic. Does that make sense to you?
Sure.
Absolutely. And if you have more melanin, you must be melanaceous, which rhymes with gracious and spacious. Melanaceous means you got more. And if you have a lot, you're melanotic, which rhymes with exotic. And the word melanotic is in the dictionary, and it means almost black.
Okay.
Large degree of melanin, almost to blackness. Now, I want the words melanemic and melanaceous in the dictionary before I die.
Okay.
And I'm going to hang on until that happens, so I can hear people saying, let's get it in there and she'll die. Get it in today. Well, I might be so delighted that I get healthier. No, but those, if melanotic is there, then so should melanaceous and melanemic be there.
Who were your mentors? Did you have any mentors growing up?
My father.
Okay.
And two teachers. When I was in high school, two male teachers, Walt Edwards and Robert Wolfe. And what they let me know is, well, you don't know everything, but you have the ability to learn. And so keep your mouth shut. As my father would say, you have two ears and one mouth so that you can listen more and talk less. And so those two guys, and they came to teaching after fighting the Second World War. And that's what made my education different as a high school student. All my teachers, all the male teachers that I had were veterans of the Second World War. And they came back from fighting to keep this country safe, fighting what was going on, what Hitler was doing. And they had to teach, snotty-nosed, pimply-faced adolescents, children, how to behave themselves and how to grow up. And they did it. And I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And they did it with kindness and compassion and total, here are the rules. These are the rules you will follow. Here are your rights. Here you have the right to be respected. We all do, but you will be held responsible if you don't respect the rights of others. They never told us that they were teaching us the 3 R's, but that's what I want teachers to tell their students today. Instead of the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic, only one of which begins with R, writing begins with W, and arithmetic begins with A, it's time to stop this nonsense and teach the 3 R's of rights, respect, and responsibility. Every person has the right to be respected, and if you don't respect their rights, then you must be held responsible for that. And if you do that in a classroom, you have created a group of students who, when the next teacher disrespects the rights of somebody, the kid will stand up and say, you know, what you just did was wrong. And he'll get sent to the principal. And the principal will have the teacher come in and say, actually, I think maybe the student was right in this case.
So, Jane, what should we do in this country? If somebody came to you and said, you got an unlimited budget, we'll do whatever program you construct to get rid of racism in this country. What would you do?
I would re-educate every educator, because instead of educating educators, we teach teachers. I'm not a teacher, I'm an educator.
What's the difference?
Big difference, big difference. Teachers teach facts and figures to get kids ready for the end of term tests. The word educator comes from the root duc dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. And you can't do that if you teach the same crap that you were taught. Columbus didn't discover America. He wasn't the first person to discover America. First Nations people didn't come up out of the ground. They came from Africa. If every teacher would get his or her there, I have to start saying there instead of his or her, I understand that. If they would get their DNA traced back as far as they could trace it, they would find that a percentage of their DNA came from a country in Africa. And the first people who inhabited this continent came from a country in Africa. Now, that's not what we're taught in school, because we don't want to believe that. That isn't what our parents or our grandparents or our great-grandparents or our great-great-grandparents were taught. But that's what my daughter and grandsons are going to be taught, because I am going to drum it into them. You children are all members of the same race. There is no black race. There is no white race. There are only shades of brown in the human race. I have a grandson, a great grandson, who is part Hispanic. That doesn't make him a member of a different race. I have a granddaughter-in-law who is African. That doesn't make her part of a different race. That makes her someone who is obviously from the country from which we all came. And I will insist, it's a good thing I'm not teaching today, because I'd have a whole lot of angry parents coming in to say, don't teach my kid that he isn't white, because that's what we depend on. Well, he isn't white, and you aren't white, and you aren't black. Your eyes are lovely brown, and mine are blue. And that's that's the reason you're doing the interviewing and I'm doing the talking. Blue-eyed people talk a lot.
Okay.
Sorry. No, I would educate the educators. And I mean, I would put them through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, number one. And then I would force them to read books like, oh Lord, I wouldn't force them to read Caste, and I wouldn't force them to read White Fragility, because those books are written to excuse white people for their ignorant behaviors. I don't want an excuse for why I'm ignorant. I want to get over the ignorance. And I want people to be led out of ignorance. And you can do that by insisting that they read books like, go to my website and download the bibliography. There are some excellent books on that bibliography. Every educator should have been required to read all those books. We could teach ourselves, we could educate ourselves out of racism.
Now, we've got 4 minutes left. That's what the Zoom is telling me. Is there any advice that you would give to young women out there, or young women out there who are struggling somehow? And
well, remember this: for the word for woman is female. In order to get a female, you have to add the chemical symbol to iron for the word for a male. The Fe is the chemical symbol for iron. So when whoever started this whole thing made people, obviously he made the female stronger than the male. So women, you didn't know that.
That's a good, that's.
yeah, I agree.
I like that.
Hey,
Makes
that's
sense
the way
to
it
me.
is. That's the way it is. Females were here first.
Okay.
If teachers would just remember these three things: without blacks, there would be no whites. Every white person is here only because black people populated what we call black people. Africans populated every landmass on the face of the earth. And as they move farther and farther from the equator, their bodies produce less and less melanin because they're exposed to less and less sunlight. So their eyes, their hair, and their skin got lighter. They didn't get dumber. Their skin and hair and eyes got lighter. That's the only reason they're what people that we call white. And they weren't called white until 1580. And that ridiculous word, the word race, came out of France, meaning a specific group of people in 1580. It's time to get over it. Without blacks, there would be no whites. Without Jews, there would be no Christianity or Islam.
Yeah.
Because they both are used the Torah and the Talmud as their biblical texts. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Without women, there would be no men. Period.
Yeah.
So if we would teach those three things, we could get rid of racism, sexism, and anti-Semitism.
Okay.
Now, I'd like to have you get rid of ageism now. I didn't care 50 years ago, but now, but I also realize that I'm not what I used to be. I can't walk as far or as fast or as climb as many stairs as I used to. That isn't ageism. That is simply a fact of life. Get used to it.
On that note, Jane, what do you consider your legacy?
What is my legacy? The idea that no power on earth can stop a man with a dream or an idea whose time has come. And the idea of one race, the human race, is what I consider, and that's not my legacy. That's what I learned from other people by talking to people who know what they're talking about, and they were mostly people of color. and reading books that they have written and listening to them and watching them. And today, hearing the kinds of things that are happening to people of color at the hands of good so-called white Christians in this country. Now, you either be a Christian and act like it, or quit calling yourself one.
Mm.
Does that make sense to you?
Indeed, it sure does.
Well, that's either stop this nonsense or simply admit that this is not a Christian country.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much.
Did I answer your questions?
Yes, you did. Yes, you
Did you
did.
learn anything?
I did.
Tell me something
Absolutely
you
did.
learned.
I learned that there were different forms of the word melanin.
Good for you. And what are they?
Ooh, now you didn't tell me it was going to be a pop quiz.
This is what I do with students. Now you practice the listening skills and you'll be able to answer the question.